Marissa's spit landed on my plate of roast chicken with a sharp, wet smack. Her words sliced through the quiet dining room. "Eat it, you useless old woman. Before long, you'll be locked away in a nursing home." The sound of the clock ticking against the wall seemed louder than her voice. Elena, my 10-year-old granddaughter, froze with her fork halfway to her lips. Adrian, my only son, looked down at his plate and chewed as if nothing had happened. In that instant, I wondered, was I truly invisible in my own home? How long would they keep pushing before something inside me shattered? Before we go further, I want to pause and invite you, yes, you who are watching this. What would you feel if it were your plate, your child, silent, your grandchild in tears? Share your feelings in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and join this growing community. We share stories that dig deep, stories that remind us we're not alone. My name is Celeste Navarro. I'm 68 years old, a retired seamstress who once spent her days stitching wedding gowns and mending uniforms for the local fire department. I'm a widow, and though life has made me tough, it has also left me yearning for a quiet dignity I thought I had earned. Instead, I sit in the home I built, treated as if I were an unwanted guest. That Sunday, I had risen before dawn to prepare dinner. The kitchen smelled of onions and rosemary, the same way my mother's kitchen smelled when I was a girl. I wanted Elena to remember her grandmother's table as warm, welcoming, a place where love was baked into every dish. I even laid out the floral china my husband and I bought together in our first year of marriage. I wore my lavender dress pressed carefully that morning, hoping foolishly that it would make me look less like a burden and more like the woman I once was. And yet, in a single gesture, Marissa turned all of it into mockery. Elena's wide eyes glistened, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak, but had already learned that silence was safer. Adrian's silence hurt worse than Marissa's venom. I raised him alone after his father walked out, working double shifts to keep a roof over our heads. And here he sat mute, pretending not to notice his wife degrading the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Through the lace curtains, I caught a flicker of movement. Mr. Darnell, my old co-worker from the textile factory, stood outside with his small dog. His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, then darted away. He had heard. Maybe tomorrow he would pretend he hadn't, but I knew the echo of Marissa's cruelty had carried beyond these walls. I looked down at the plate before me, once filled with pride, now tainted with contempt, and though my hands trembled, something inside me began to steady. The room was still, but within me a storm was gathering, silent for now, but impossible to contain for much longer. The silence in the dining room stretched so long it became unbearable, pressing down on my chest, like a weight I could no longer carry. My fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth, knuckles whitening. For years I had swallowed words like bitter medicine, convincing myself it was better to endure than to disrupt my son's fragile peace. But in that moment, staring at the plate soaked in contempt, I felt something within me harden into steel. I rose slowly, the chair legs scraping against the wooden floor with a sound that cut through the air, sharper than Marissa's voice ever had. My heart pounded against my ribs, not with fear this time, but with an anger so pure it steadied me. Before anyone could react, I lifted the plate with both hands, and with all the force left in these 68-year-old arms, hurled it to the ground. The porcelain shattered, exploding into jagged fragments that scattered across the tiles like sparks from a fire. Marissa gasped, jerking back as though I had thrown the pieces at her. Adrian's fork clattered against his plate, his eyes finally tearing away from the food he had been pretending to eat. Elena whimpered, clutching her stuffed bear tightly against her chest, her little body trembling in the chair. "Enough," I heard myself say, my voice low, unfamiliar, almost frightening in its firmness. 5 years of silence ends tonight. Marissa's lips curled into that smile she always wore when she believed she had the upper hand. "You've lost your mind, Celeste," she sneered. "You're making a spectacle of yourself in front of your granddaughter." Something inside me snapped fully then. For years I had shielded Adrian from pain, from truths too heavy for a child, from the absence that defined our lives. But now, in this moment, I let the words burst free. A spectacle, I barked, my voice rising, echoing in the corners of the room. Do you want to talk about spectacles, Marissa? About humiliations? I turned toward my son, his face pale, his jaw tightening. Your wife spits on the food I cook with my own hands in my own house, and you sit there in silence, just like your father once did, silent when he walked out and left us with nothing. The name unspoken for decades hung in the room like smoke. Adrian flinched as though struck, his eyes darting to Elena, then back to me. I had never said it aloud to him in anger before. I had never allowed the memory of his father's abandonment to bleed into our fragile dinners. But the dam was broken now. You don't understand, Adrian began, his voice shaky. No, I cut him off, my finger trembling as I pointed at him. I understand perfectly. Silence runs in this family like a curse. Your father chose silence when he betrayed us. You choose silence now, letting your wife degrade me while your daughter watches. What do you think Elena learns from this? That cruelty is strength and love is weakness. Elena's tears spilled over her small hands, gripping her bare so tightly its stitched seams stretched. Grandma, she whispered, but her voice cracked, swallowed by the tension. Marissa rose from her chair, fury replacing her smirk. Don't you dare drag his father into this. You're hysterical, Celeste, completely hysterical. I laughed bitterly, the sound strange to my own ears, like glass breaking. Hysterical? No, honest. For the first time in years, I'm speaking the truth. And it terrifies you, doesn't it? Because as long as I was silent, you had control. But silence has cost me too much. It cost me dignity. It cost me my son's respect, and I will not let it cost me my granddaughter's heart. Adrian pushed back his chair, rising slowly, his palms raised as though approaching a wild animal. Mom, please, he pleaded. Let's calm down. Let's be civilized. Civilized! I spat the word out like poison. Civilized was what I tried to be when your father slammed the door for the last time. Civilized was what I forced myself to be while I worked double shifts so you wouldn't starve. Civilized is what I've been every time Marissa treated me like the hired help under this roof. And what has it earned me? A plate of food, desecrated, and a silence from my own son that cuts deeper than any insult. The room quivered with the weight of my words. Adrian's face drained of color, Marissa's fists clenched at her sides, and Elena buried her face in the bear's worn fur. The fragments of porcelain around my feet glimmered in the dim light like shattered years I could never piece back together. But within me, for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. When the last echo of my words faded, the house felt different, colder, emptier, as if the walls themselves had heard enough. I stood there among the shards of porcelain, breathing hard, until I realized nothing I could say would change what was already broken. Adrian's lips moved, trying to gather words, but they fell silent again. Marissa stood, rigid eyes flashing, already plotting how to twist this moment into proof of my instability. And Elena sat curled in her chair, her small chest rising and falling with quick, frightened breaths. It was then I knew staying here would destroy what little dignity I still had. Silence had chained me for too long. Now even my anger threatened to turn into another prison. I needed to leave, not tomorrow, not after another compromise, but tonight. I turned away from their faces and walked slowly down the hallway. My footsteps thudded against the carpet, heavy yet strangely steady. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out the old brown suitcase that had been gathering dust since my husband died. Its leather corners were scuffed. The handle cracked, but it felt solid in my hands. I began folding clothes with mechanical precision, sweaters worn soft from winters, past the blue scarf my mother had knitted before her hands grew too weak. A framed photograph of Elena with a gap-toothed smile. Each item seemed to whisper that I deserved more than this constant humiliation. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was the tremor of release of knowing I was finally reclaiming the right to decide my own life. Through the thin walls, I could hear them, Marissa's shrill accusations, Adrian's defensive mutters. They weren't arguing about me. They were arguing about each other, pointing fingers, tallying who had failed first. My departure had already become another battleground, but I refused to fight in it any longer. When I zipped the suitcase, the sound was final, like a curtain falling after a play too long endured. I lifted it carefully, wincing at the weight, and made my way toward the front door. The clock in the hall read nearly midnight, and outside the rain had begun, steady, relentless, a drumming against the roof that matched the beat of my heart. As I reached for the knob, I heard a small cry behind me, Grandma Elena's voice trembling desperate. She had slipped from her chair and followed me, her tiny feet padding across the hallway. She clung to her stuffed bare eyes, shining with tears. I knelt down, suitcase still in hand. "My love," I whispered, brushing wet strands of hair from her cheek. "Remember, this people who love you never spit in your food. They never silence you or make you feel less than who you are." Her arms tightened around my neck, and for a moment, I almost faltered. But then Marissa's sharp voice cut through the hall. "Elena, enough." She strode forward, yanking the child back with a grip too firm, her nails digging into the small shoulder. "Go to bed." Elena's cry echoed as the door shut between us, a sound that pierced deeper than any insult. I stepped into the rain. The suitcase wheels dragged over the walkway, splashing through shallow puddles. My lavender dress clung to my legs, soaked through in seconds, but I kept moving. The street was empty, save for the faint glow of a taxi's headlights approaching the corner. I raised my hand and the car slowed. The driver leaned out, squinting through the downpour. Then recognition lit her face. "Senora Navarro," she asked, her voice warm despite the storm. It was Rosa, one of my former students from the sewing classes I used to teach at the community center. She was older now, lines of her own etched around her mouth, but the spark in her eyes was the same. "Get in, please," she urged, stepping out to help with the suitcase. The rain plastered her hair to her cheeks, but she smiled, as if fate itself had sent her. "You shouldn't be out here alone." As I sank into the back seat, the leather damp beneath me, I glanced once at the house. My house, yet no longer my home. Through the curtainless window, I thought I saw Adrian standing in the living room, shoulders slumped, hands pressed against his face. But I turned away before my heart could soften. The engine hummed, the windshield wipers swept back and forth, and Rosa drove me away into the night. For the first time in years, I felt the air filling my lungs without the weight of someone else's disdain. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew this much: I was leaving behind not just a house, but the silence that had suffocated me for far too long. The rain carried me through the city like a cleansing river, each drop washing away years of bitterness. By the time Rosa pulled up in front of Lucinda's small brick house on Maple Avenue, my body felt heavy with exhaustion, but strangely lighter at the same time. The porch light flickered on as we approached, and there she was, Lucinda, my friend from the old days at St. Mary's Hospital, standing in her robe with her hair tied back as if she had been expecting me all along, Celeste. She whispered, her arms already open. The moment I felt her embrace, something inside me cracked, releasing tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in front of Adrian or Marissa. Lucinda held me like a sister, guiding me into the warmth of her home. The scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, and the ticking of her grandfather clock filled the silence I couldn't yet break. For the next 2 days, I rested under her roof. We spoke little at first, letting the comfort of familiarity settle around us like an old quilt. Lucinda had always been a woman of gentle strength, the kind of nurse who could calm the fiercest pain with a touch of her hand. She made me soup, left the radio on low, and reminded me with every gesture that kindness still existed in the world. It was on the 3rd evening, as we sat at her kitchen table with steaming mugs between us, that she placed her hand over mine. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice carrying the weight of news carefully held back. I looked up, wary. "What is it, Lucinda?" Her eyes softened with sorrow. "Your brother, Raphael. He passed away last month. I didn't know how to reach you." The words struck me harder than Marissa's insult, harder even than Adrian's silence. Raphael, my younger brother, stubborn and proud, the boy who once carved our initials into the oak tree behind our childhood home. We hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. not since a fight over the family business that split us down the middle. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips, feeling grief and guilt rise in waves. "I didn't even get to say goodbye," I whispered. Lucinda squeezed my hand firmly. "He thought of you, Celeste, more than you realize. Before he died, he left instructions with his lawyer. He wanted you to have something." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, its edges worn from handling. Inside were documents, title deeds, bank statements, signatures that proved it all real. Raphael had left me a small villa on the outskirts of town along with a modest savings account. My breath caught as I scanned the words. A home. Not a room borrowed in someone else's house, not a space overshadowed by disdain, but a home of my own. Lucinda leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And there's more. He wrote a letter. He asked me to keep it safe until you were ready." I unfolded the pages slowly, Raphael's handwriting instantly familiar, bold and uneven, as if he had written in haste. "My dearest sister," it began, "I know I failed you. Our quarrels were foolish and pride kept us apart too long. I cannot change the past, but I can offer you a piece of the future." Tears blurred my vision as I read. He apologized for the years wasted, confessed he had followed my life from afar, even knew of the struggles I faced living with Adrian. And then in a paragraph that made me pause, he revealed something startling. "I set aside a fund years ago from the company. Money no one knew about money. I intended as my safety. But it is yours now. The lawyer will explain where to find it. Use it, Celeste, not just to survive, but to live." I lowered the letter, my heart racing. A house, savings, and now the promise of something hidden, something that might change everything I thought I knew about my future. Lucinda watched me carefully, her eyes glistening. "Raphael may be gone, but he gave you a chance at freedom, a chance to start again." For the first time in years, I felt possibilities stir inside me. I wasn't just a discarded widow anymore or a burden in someone else's house. I was Celeste Navarro's sister, mother, grandmother, and maybe, just maybe, I was about to reclaim the life that had been stolen piece by piece. The letter from Raphael lingered in my mind for days, every sentence, like a thread stitching my fractured spirit back together. With Lucinda's encouragement and the lawyer's confirmation, I moved into Raphael's villa on the edge of town. The first night there, I stood in the empty kitchen, running my hand across the smooth marble counters, and whispered aloud, "This is mine." It was a declaration not just to the walls, but to myself. Yet as much as the villa felt like a sanctuary, I knew there was unfinished business waiting behind the door of my old house. The silence I had left behind still rattled in my chest. Adrian and Marissa needed to hear my truth, not whispered in tears, not muttered behind closed doors, but spoken with the clarity of someone who finally understood her worth. So one bright morning, I dressed carefully. I chose a deep navy dress that carried the weight of dignity, a pearl brooch I had saved from my mother, and a calmness that surprised even me. Beside me walked Daniel Cruz, the young attorney Raphael's firm had assigned to my case. His dark suit seemed almost too formal for the small suburban street, but his presence was a shield. When Adrian opened the door, his eyes widened. Shock, relief, and guilt tangled across his face. "Mom," he whispered, stepping aside. Marissa appeared behind him, arms folded, lips tight, the same smirk she always wore when she thought she still had control. I stepped into the living room, the air heavy with stale silence. The furniture looked tired. The once polished table now dulled by neglect. For 5 years I had been invisible here. Now for the first time, every eye was fixed on me. I didn't come to beg. I began, my voice steady, echoing in the space that had so often swallowed my words. I came to make things clear. I have a new home now, a place of my own where no one spits in my food or silences my voice. Adrian's eyes dropped to the floor, his hands clasped. Marissa scoffed. "A new home? On what money, Celeste?" "Don't tell me you won the lottery." I held her gaze. "I don't need luck. Raphael left me a villa. He left me enough to live with dignity, and that means I no longer depend on this roof." The color drained from Adrian's face, but Marissa's fury sparked brighter. "You're bluffing. This is still your house, but we've lived here. We've made improvements." You can't just walk in, and Daniel's calm voice cut her off. Actually, she can. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, opening it with deliberate care. These are the deeds signed and recorded. The property belongs solely to Mrs. Celeste Navarro. No joint ownership, no transfer. She has every legal right to decide its future. He placed the documents on the table with a firmness that silenced the room. Marissa's mouth fell open, her hands balling into fists. This is ridiculous after all we've done. Done! I interrupted, my voice, sharp years of swallowed rage crystallizing into clarity. You mean living here, rent-free, feeding off my pension, treating me like a maid in the house my sweat paid for? That ends now. I'm selling this house. You have 30 days to leave. Adrian's head jerked up, his eyes wide, pleading. Mom, please, this is Elena's home. I felt my heart ache at the mention of her name, but I stood firm. Elena will always have a home with me, but she will not grow up thinking it is acceptable to degrade her grandmother. She will learn respect, not by my silence, but by my example. For once, Marissa had no words. Her face burned red, her breath short, as if the ground beneath her feet had finally shifted. Adrian looked hollow, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. I picked up the papers Daniel had laid out and tucked them back into the folder. This is not cruelty. This is justice. For too long, I let this house be a prison. Now it will be my freedom. And with that, I rose, Daniel following close behind. As I reached the doorway, I turned back one final time. You called me useless. Remember this moment, Marissa, because the woman you spat on now decides your future under this roof. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of the door closing behind me. When I stepped out of my old house that day, the echo of my own words still rang in my ears. For once, silence wasn't a cage, it was a crown. I carried it with me as Daniel drove me back to Raphael's villa, the folder of deeds and signatures heavy on my lap. The house rose before us in warm terracotta and stone, its windows glinting in the afternoon sun, like eyes finally opened. It no longer looked like Raphael's shadow. It looked like my dawn. The first weeks were quiet, almost eerily so. After years of walking on eggshells, silence felt foreign. But little by little, I filled it. I unpacked boxes of family photos, hung embroidered cloths I had once tucked away, and played soft jazz on the old radio Raphael had left behind. Each corner of the villa began to breathe with memory and with possibility. Yet it wasn't enough for me to simply exist. I had been invisible too long. One morning, as I stirred a pot of soup, I thought of the women I used to work with at the hospital, the widows, the retired nurses, the neighbors who now lived alone with too much time and too many ghosts. What if this house could hold more than just me? So I made calls. I opened my kitchen. And by the end of the month, Raphael's dining room was alive with the clatter of pans and the hum of voices. I began teaching cooking classes, simple dishes, at first chicken pot pie, cornbread stews that warm the bones. But the food was only half of it. The real feast was laughter, the way women who had once eaten alone now shared recipes, stories, even tears around my table. Celeste. Mrs. Hargrove said one afternoon, wiping flour from her apron, "You haven't just taught me pie crust. You've taught me how to look forward to Sunday again." Her words settled into me like sunlight through a window. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was giving shaping and receiving life in return. Then one Saturday morning, as I was kneading bread, I heard the softest knock on the back door. When I opened it, my breath caught. There stood Elena, her hair in loose braids, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes, wide and nervous, darted toward the street as if she had slipped away without permission. "Grandma," she whispered, Can I stay a while? I want to learn what you're teaching the others." I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Does your mother know you're here?" She shook her head quickly, tears brimming. "No, she'd be mad, but I don't care. I miss you, and I want to cook like you do." My heart clenched, caught between fear and joy. I should have told her to go home, but how could I? Here was my granddaughter reaching across the silence her parents had built, asking for something more than food, asking for connection. So I welcomed her in. I tied a child-sized apron around her waist, the fabric nearly swallowing her, and placed her on a stool by the counter. She watched my hands closely as I shaped the dough. Then, with all the seriousness of a surgeon, she copied me. Flour dusted her nose, her cheeks, her braids. And for the first time in so long, I heard her giggle without hesitation. From that day forward, she became my little assistant. She helped me stir soups, peel apples, even arrange the table for my classes. The women adored her, calling her our tiny chef, and each time she laughed, I felt the wound Marissa had carved begin to close. I knew the storm wasn't over. Marissa's anger would come, Adrian's silence might harden again. But in that villa kitchen, flour on our hands and hope in the air, Elena and I were writing our own recipe. A recipe for joy, for defiance, for family remade in the warmth of love and fire of resilience. And for the first time, I believed this wasn't just survival. This was a beginning. Elena's visits soon became the quiet rhythm of my days. She would slip through the back gate with her backpack bouncing her little hands, eager to roll dough or stir soup. Each giggle, each whispered, "Grandma, don't tell Mom," was a seed of healing I never thought I'd plant again. But secrets like rising dough cannot stay hidden forever. One late afternoon after the women had left and Elena was sketching recipes in her little notebook, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Adrian standing there drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as if he had run all the way from his house. His eyes searched mine. No arrogance, no deflection, just raw desperation. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "Is Elena here?" I stepped aside. He entered, his gaze immediately landing on his daughter at the kitchen table. She froze, the pencil slipping from her hand. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence was thick with fear and love colliding. Then Adrian sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I knew she was coming here," he murmured. "I didn't stop her. Because I wanted her to. I wanted her to see you. God, Mom, I've been such a coward." His confession startled me more than Marissa's insults ever had. I sat across from him, my heart heavy. "Coward?" I asked softly. He lifted his head, tears streaking down his cheeks. I stayed silent because I thought silence would keep my marriage together. Every time Marissa humiliated you, I told myself it was easier not to fight. Easier to keep the peace. But it wasn't peace, it was betrayal. Betrayal of you. Betrayal of Elena, too. The boy I once raised, the boy who used to hide behind my skirt during thunderstorms, now sat before me as a man stripped of defenses. His shoulders shook, and I realized he wasn't just mourning what he'd lost. He was mourning who he had become. I reached across the table, taking his trembling hand. "Adrian," I whispered, "I forgave you long before you asked. But forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility. If you want to stand beside me, if you want Elena to grow up knowing respect, you must choose differently. You must stop depending on Marissa. Stand on your own feet as a man, not as her shadow." He nodded vigorously, gripping my hand as if it were the only thing keeping him from drowning. "I will, Mom, I promise. I just don't know where to start." Before I could answer, the front door opened without a knock. Marissa's heels clicked against the hardwood like daggers. She strode in a manila envelope in hand, her expression oddly triumphant. "Well," she said, tossing the envelope onto the table, "I guess it doesn't matter what either of you want, because I've already decided." Adrian's face went pale. "Marissa, what is this?" She crossed her arms, her lips curling. "Divorce papers. Did you really think I'd stay shackled to this mess? You have nothing, Adrian. No job worth speaking of. No house, no money of your own. I was only holding on to see if your mother's property could be squeezed for something. But since she's cut us out, I'm done." Her words landed like stones. But for me, they were not a wound. They were confirmation. The greed I had sensed for years stood naked, now exposed in black and white. Adrian stared at the papers as if they were a sentence he had written for himself. Marissa grabbed her purse, already heading for the door. "Good luck with your little cooking school, Celeste. And Adrian, don't bother calling. I've moved on." The door slammed, leaving only the sound of Elena's quiet sobs. Adrian pulled her close, clutching her as if he feared she might vanish too. His eyes met mine, filled with shame, but also something new resolve. "Mom, He whispered hoarsely. "You were right. She never loved me. She loved what she thought she could take. But I still have you. I still have Elena. If you'll have me, I want to start over, on my own terms, with you." For the first time in years, I saw not just my son, but the man he could still become. And in that moment, amid the ruins Marissa left behind, I felt the fragile outline of a family being redrawn not by fear, but by truth. After Marissa's departure, the house felt quieter than ever. Not the silence of hostility I had once endured, but the silence that comes after a storm has passed when the air is heavy, yet fresh with promise. Adrian stayed that night, his head bowed. Elena curled against his chest, as if afraid to let him go. For the first time, I saw my son stripped of excuses and illusions, standing at the edge of something fragile, but true redemption. Weeks turned into months. Adrian moved into Raphael's villa with Elena and me, not as a dependent, but as a man learning to stand tall again. He took on work at a local construction company, his hands blistered but his eyes brighter with each paycheck he earned on his own. I would hear the front door open late in the evening, and he would smile, tired but proud, as Elena raced into his arms. For the first time in years, she called him Daddy. Without hesitation, her trust restored one meal, one bedtime story at a time. The villa itself blossomed into more than a house. It became a living place of second chances. My cooking classes grew spilling over from the kitchen into the garden. Women came not just to cook, but to heal. Some arrived widowed, some abandoned, some simply lonely, but all left with their heads a little higher. Elena, with her small apron and determined hands, was at the center of it all. She introduced herself as Grandma's assistant, and the women welcomed her with warmth, letting her stir sauces, knead dough, and beam with the pride of someone who belonged. One afternoon, after the last student had left, Adrian lingered in the doorway watching Elena wash mixing bowls at the sink. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Mommy, she's happy here, happier than she's ever been. And so am I." I looked at him, the son I once feared I had lost forever, and felt a tenderness that washed away years of pain. "Then this is where we start," I said. "Not with apologies, not with blame. With today. With what we choose to build now." He nodded, his eyes damp. It wasn't a promise of perfection. It was a promise of effort, of love stitched back together thread by thread. At night, after Elena had gone to bed and Adrian had retreated to his room with blueprints spread across his desk, I would sit on the terrace with a cup of tea. The villa, once Raphael's legacy, now pulsed with new life. Children's laughter, the scent of bread, the chatter of women who had found community. I thought back to the day Marissa spat on my plate, the humiliation that once felt like the death of my dignity. How strange, how miraculous that it had instead been the birth of everything I now held dear. I realized then that pain, when faced head-on, can become a key that unlocks doors we didn't even know were waiting for us. My humiliation had carved a path to freedom. My silence had birthed a voice, and my brokenness had built a home not only for myself, but for those I loved. As the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I whispered words I wished every woman in the world could hear. Dignity can be trampled, but it is never destroyed. And the moment we dare to rise, even once the whole of our life can change. That was the truth I carried now. That was the truth I would pass on to Elena, to Adrian, to every woman who stepped into my kitchen. A truth born from ashes, shining brighter than any flame Marissa or her cruelty could ever extinguish. And with that, I closed the chapter of my old life only to find a new one wide open before me.